This event is the latest in a series of activities that aims to mark 50 years of teaching and learning about systems thinking at the Open University. My name is Rupesh Shah, and I'm a senior lecturer and staff tutor at the Open University. And with me, but not with me, is my colleague Martin Reynolds. And we're delighted to be joined by Jean Bellinger for today's session. We have people on Zoom, on YouTube, and in Facebook. So welcome to everybody out there. The event is being recorded, so welcome also if you are watching this now in the future. It's wonderful to have you all with us. Jean is going to be talking to us today about trial and learning. He's got about 20 minutes of presentation to deliver with about 20 minutes of question and answer. Jean said he's happy to take questions as we go along. So please post your questions in the chat or on whatever platform you're engaged with, and we will try to pick them up as we go along or at the end. In preparing for this talk, I cast my mind back to when I first came across Jean's work. I had a hunch it was some time ago, and at the weekend I went digging into my archive. I discovered that I still have the printouts on systems archetypes from his Outsides website. I can see these, and they were printed out in 2003, Jean, so that was some time ago. And it's got outsides.com, you know, down there at the bottom. So I was clearly reading some of your early work from those Outside days. And I can recall thinking about how straightforward and useful Jean's explanations of systems ideas were. I think I felt a bit like a kid in a candy store, really, because he was putting all this material out there for free. And at the time, I was really hungry for learning about systems. More recently, I interviewed Jean for some research that we were doing at the Open University about building capability for systems thinking in practice. And that research has directly informed our own teaching, including work on the development of a level 7 apprenticeship in the UK, which is being launched next year. Reflecting on these and other encounters, I realized that Jean's name shares the same root in English as other words, generous and generative, which I can certainly associate with him. The root word Jean apparently has an Indo-European root, which means to give birth or beget, with derivatives referring to procreation and familial and tribal groups. You know, and it really strikes me that Jean's willingness to share insights of systems is in simple and accessible ways has indeed given birth to much learning for others. I think with the richness of systems ideas and traditions, it's possible to overcomplicate matters to the point that we end up simply talking to others from our own tribe. But perhaps at this time, we need more than ever to be taking some of the elegant and simple insights that systems thinking has to offer and sharing them through stories with people of all ages and all backgrounds. So perhaps as you listen to Jean today, think about how you can offer current and future generations insights of systems in a generative and generous way. Okay, over to you, Jean.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen. So thank you for coming. I appreciate the invitation. What I will try and do over the next 20 minutes is I didn't come to sell you anything or convince you of anything. What I'd like to do is share some of the aha moments that I have had over the last 45 years, most of which I really wish had come far earlier than later, because I really could have used them, though I am pleased to have them now rather than not have them at all. So this journey began in 1975 while taking a computer science course, and the instructor said, in this class, we're going to read Stafford Beer's Platform for Change. I had no clue as to why, though when I read it, it turned out that this book was for me, like other people claim taking mind-altering drugs is. To say that I became an evangelist for the systemic perspective is an understatement, to the point where people would say, "What do you do?" And as I would tell them, you could see their eyes glaze over as they were asking themselves, why did I ask and how do I get him to stop? This went on and on and on until I continued to create models, but I had a problem because I had learned from early on, or had been drilled into me, that that it's not good to make errors. So I always wanted to start in the right place. So because I didn't know where the right place was, the blank piece of paper caused me to not start, and the not start resulted in a blank piece of paper, and it was a vicious reinforcing cycle. Until all of a sudden it dawned on me that it's all connected. It doesn't matter where you start, just approach it from the Nike perspective, just do it. If you use a thorough, intentional understanding of the relationships, you'll come up with a meaningful model. And if it isn't, well, throw it away and build another one. So this continued on, and I'm building quantitative models, doing simulations, and I'm doing qualitative models. And in 1991, I read an article in Scientific American which said, Stella is available for my Macintosh, and it took me about 10 minutes to order that, and I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. Well, all the while I'm learning about additional models and methods that claim to embrace the systems paradigm. And I'm curious as to why it is that we need so many models and methods to describe something, because systems thinking is just a not very grown up version of system dynamics, or so I thought. And then Jeff Elliott sends me an email and says, you got to read this book. Well, the book was Mike Jackson's Systems Thinking Creative Holism for Managers. And my initial response was, couldn't you have found a smaller one? Though I slogged my way through it, and I was absolutely delighted that I did, because when I got to Mike's model in terms of this matrix, in terms of the complexity of systems and the cohesiveness of the participants, I began to understand why it made sense to have different approaches for different contexts with different intents. You can't develop a system dynamics model for a problem that you don't know what is. Though, while I was delighted to get to this point of understanding, it only lasted for a heartbeat until I became terribly depressed, because I said, self, you're just not smart enough to understand all this stuff. So, because I mean, there are, what, the encyclopedia says there are thousands of models and methods that claim to embrace the systems paradigm. So what am I going to do? Well, it turned out that I was rebuilding Aronson's innovation model, which is a little stupid model about a farmer and crop eating insects, and it's got 4 loops in it. And I built it, and I asked myself this unbelievable question: how do I go about building models? You know, I've been building models for years, but I never stopped to ask myself the question about how do I go about this? And I remember, and I thought back to when I started, in that I used to build models from the top down, the bottom up, the inside out, and the outside in, and it was absolute chaos from beginning to end. But along the way, without realizing it, the approach to developing models had become extremely orderly, and I didn't know it. And I had the answer. Well, I had an answer for me, and the answer was, and I sort of digested or distilled all of the models and methods of the systems paradigm down to a question of understanding relationships and their implications. For me, there is no more. There aren't even any things anymore. There are just bundles of relationships to which we have affixed labels as a matter of convenience. So this set me on a different path. And you know, the path wanders and wanders, and it's good. And when I realized it was just relationships and their implications, I said, well, what are the various relationships that make sense? And I realized that there are only 3 recurring structures. There's an independent growth or decline structure, which is feedback independent. There's a balancing or goal-seeking structure, and there's a reinforcing structure. And I realized that this is all there is. And it tied me back to the work of Bertalanffy in the 30s, when he talked about fundamental underlying structures that operated across all branches of science, which when I first read that, in Uncommon Sense, The Life and Thought of Bertalanffy. I said, this is ludicrous, until I realized that the various branches of science are a fabrication of man, not nature. So why wouldn't there be just one set of underlying structures that operated across all branches of science? So then at that time I was reading Sengi's The Fifth Discipline and ran into archetypes, and I fell in love with archetypes because for me, there are only archetypes. Because there's only 3 fundamental structures, and I'm not sure about this one because I think it violates Newton's third law. Any model that you build is really just a collection of archetypes. It's an archetype or a collection of archetypes stuffed together. Though more often than not, it's not easy to realize that that's what it is. I mean, to spend 6 or 8 months working with an organization building this unbelievable relationship model and turning it into a simulation model, and then all of a sudden one day saying, oh, this is just a simple shifting the burden structure, and they're spending all their time focusing on the symptoms as opposed to solving the problem. And why did I do all this? So it's sort of, you have to endure the journey for the insight to show up. So I'm feeling froggy, and I developed this course called the Certified Systems Thinker, which I did on Udemy. And the first few people that went through it provided such rave reviews that I thought I was being punked. And the reviews continued, and we'll get back to this piece in a minute. So when I talked about only archetypes, there were a number of instances where I realized in developing and refining structures that from time to time you have aha moments in trying to really understand what's happening. And this particular model, which I figured out was just 2 shifting the burden structures mashed together, and it becomes much easier to understand. Now, if you end up getting to the Kumu project, which is the source of this presentation, and you mouse over these elements, you'll see things show up, and down the bottom there are links. Those links will take you to the Kumu project that is the source of that particular portion of the model. So in trying to distill this into something more understandable, it went from here to something that I thought was an abstract, and the abstract was as complicated as the original, so I wasn't getting anywhere. But in the process of doing that, I had an aha moment to realize that this structure is actually this, where this is the accommodate births, and this is the avoid births, and this is the promote unwanted births. And in the realization was there are 2 relationships that are missing from this model. So it's hard to define a way to actually go about this in a rigorous sense. It's some art and some science on an ongoing basis. So while all this is going on, I'm still continuing to develop and inflict my models on other people. And inflict is a good word, because you labor over a model for weeks or months, and you get so wedded to it, and you're so excited about it, you send it to other people because you want to impress them with how smart you are, and they really don't care. I finally realized that I would send them a model, and after it made their head hurt for a few days, they'd send back a message that says, well, that's nice, but what they really wanted to say is, why did you send this to me? Fortunately, I made this connection between a model and a play. If I go to the play and I sit there and I watch the relationships evolve between the actors from one act to another, and the play is relatively well done, I leave the theater and I take the story with me, because as Bateson said, it's the pattern that connects. What we as systems thinkers in any one of the multitude of dimensions you want to identify, have done for years, is sort of equivalent to having the playwright walk up to a person who's not seen the play, hand them the script, and 5 minutes later say, what do you think? There's simply no way that a person can comprehend that piece of work in that time frame in that manner. And it was at that moment I became a storyteller, and I tell people I'm a recovering systems thinker. So when I used to tell people I was a systems thinker, they'd say, what does that mean? But when I tell them I'm a storyteller, I develop stories about relationships and their implications, they say, well, doesn't that sort of relate to everything? And my response is, yeah, that's the curse. So understanding that it's a play and you watch it, if you develop a paper and you put the model in it and you write all this description of it, if you read part of the description and you look at the model and you read the description, you read the model, look at the model, by the time you get to the end of the paper, you got a case of whiplash. So I finally realized that for me, the only thing that makes sense is to develop a model and unfold it and tell a story so that the person can sit there and watch the story unfold, and they don't have to read anything. They can just watch the story unfold. And if there's a part of it that doesn't make sense, they can back up and watch it over again. And you're looking at an example of it at the moment. It's an unfolding story that is about a set of relationships and the way that they're evolving over time. So this is what I do all the time, is simply develop stories about relationships and their implications. So now we'll get back to this part. So a couple of people went through this program and they gave it rave reviews, and then they asked me a question. They said, okay, this is all well and good, but how do I sell systems thinking to my organization? And I had a meltdown. What part of this course did they miss? Because you can't sell systems thinking to your organization. It just does not work. I mean, I read about the Formula 50s and I endured the sensitive 60s, the strategic 70s, the excellent 80s, the nanosecond 90s, and the low O's. And they were just full of fads, most of which made organizations worse rather than better. And the wonderful thing about Sengi's Fifth Discipline book was people said, what do I do with it on Monday? Because it wasn't a formula for accomplishing something. So rather than just debate the issue, I pondered it for a couple of weeks. And here's what I came up with. People always do exactly what makes the most amount of sense to them in the context of the moment based on their current understanding. I have debated this with people endlessly, and they have yet to find one white crow. So I haven't changed my mind yet. The implication is that if you do something that, from my perspective, makes no sense whatsoever, it's not because of something you don't understand, it's something because that I don't understand. Because if I were you, I would be doing the same thing. So I have to follow Covey's fifth habit of highly effective people, which is seek first to understand and then to be understood. So rather than debate with you why what you're doing doesn't make sense, I should in fact spend time trying to understand why it is that you're doing what you do. But I have to figure out how to do that without annoying you, without causing you to become defensive, because as soon as you become defensive, we just debate stuff and we get nowhere. The second part of this was Spencer Johnson wrote a book in the late 80s called The 1 Minute Salesperson, which was a nice book that didn't take long to read, but the takeaway from it is a quote that says, while almost everyone loves to buy, almost no one likes to be sold. And I connected that with a person walking around a department store looking at things, and the clerk walks up and says, may I help you? And the typical response is something along the lines of, no, I'm just looking. But then I said, why is that the response? What I came up with is that the story that runs through the person's head in about a microsecond is, How can this person be so presumptuous as to think I need help? I'm completely capable of helping myself. The clerk has sort of made an impact on that person's sense of self. And whenever your sense of self is threatened, you become defensive. So that's why this makes sense, was part of why you can't sell systems thinking to any organization. But the third part was I thought was kind of interesting. If you've ever seen the movie Fight Club, the first rule of Fight Club is not to talk about Fight Club. And I finally decided that the first rule of systems thinking was not to talk about systems thinking. All right? Because if I come to you and tell you that, you've got a problem, and to better understand your problem, you need to learn systems thinking, I've insulted your intelligence. I mean, it's ludicrous. It kind of rolls into the other two. Well, all five of these actually connect together themselves. The fourth one was from Buckminster Fuller, which says something about you should not try to change the way people think, because it's a waste of time. You need to give people tools that enable them to think differently. And in the realm of systems thinking, you are the tool. You end up enabling people to think differently, though you have to go about it in a stealthy sort of way, because the last piece of this is from Lao Tzu, which says you have to honor people and they honor you. And when the sage has completed his work, they will say we did it ourselves. So what I realized is that if I begin to interact with a person that's wrestling with a problem, I ask them to describe for me the problem. And as they're describing the problem, I say, is it okay if I take some notes? I take my notes in the form of a relationship map. So they're talking and I'm drawing these arrows and connecting pieces together. And it's amazing that in a very short period of time, they seem to get connected to the map. And I begin to ask more connected questions based on what's already on the map. And they begin to say, well, this connects to this and this, and we ought to add this, and this connects to. You've got them doing mapping, and you've never said anything about mapping or systems thinking or anything else. It's the way it happens is absolutely amazing. I went to do a workshop for 35 people or so, and I stupidly forgot it was a workshop. And I had all this material prepared, and who would want to listen to me for 4 hours? So while I'm having coffee at breakfast, I realized that I have to do a workshop and I haven't prepared anything. So while I'm finishing my coffee, I fabricated a workshop. And I walk into this room of all these people, and I say, take out a piece of paper. On this piece of paper, draw a dot and label it cat. A couple of inches away from it, draw another dot and label it mouse. Now draw an arrow from cat to mouse and label it chases. You've now created your first relationship model. If you feel faint, you should leave now. And this group was absolutely out of control for 4 hours. But after 4 hours, they were creating very elaborate relationship models and telling stories to each other about their understanding, their new understanding of what it was that they were wrestling with. And I walked out at 4 hours and I was flying, because through my interactions with you, probably the best that I could possibly hope to accomplish is enable you to realize how intelligent you are, because you are. So where are we now? We are back to, okay, so I get lost in my own stuff here. All of this stuff connects together in reading a book by Chip and Dan Heath called Moments. They've written a bunch of books, Fit and Stick and Stitch and Moments and Upstream. And so they've written a lot of books, but they're all chapters in the same book, and it's all about change. And they say the best way to communicate something is to enable people to trip over the truth. You take a clear insight, compressed in time, presented in a way that enables the audience to discover it for themselves. It's real easy to write down this 3-step process. It's not so easy to actually figure out how to craft the constructs that enable that. So if you look at this, we have a problem. I'm sitting in the kitchen having a pleasant breakfast, and my wife yells down from upstairs, "Are you finally going to clean up that unsightly growth around the bird feeder today? I'm getting tired of looking at it." And when this happens, this whole set of historical relationships flashes before my eyes, and I understand how I got myself in this predicament. See, I deal with a lot of frustration on an ongoing basis, and a pleasant breakfast helps me deal with the frustration, which typically detracts from my pleasant breakfast. So it's a vicious reinforcing cycle. But the last few days, I've been watching the birds outside on the railing, and they've improved the pleasantness of my breakfast, and I like this. So after a few days, I decided to install a bird feeder, because the bird feeder will attract more birds, and it'll contribute to my pleasant breakfast. And as part of that, it will increase the attractiveness, and there'll be more birds, and it'll be wonderful. So the part of this that I didn't think about was, have you seen the price of bird seed? So I got to buy bird seed, which is adding to my frustration. And then the bird, it's a feeder, creates spillage, which means I need to buy more bird seed, and the spillage promotes unsightly growth, which adds to my frustration. And the spillage attracts rodents, and I got more frustration. And the bird feeder attracts squirrels, the universal eating machine, which decreases the birds at the feeder, increases the need to buy bird seed, and increases spillage, and adds to my frustration. And now the birds are pooping all over the railing, and I got to figure out I got to go clean that up. So the question is, what's the real problem? Is it my wife? Should I just get rid of my wife and I don't have this problem anymore? Or is it a bad design for the bird feeder? Should I design it so the squirrels can't get to it? Should I find cheaper bird seed? Where's the real problem? And I usually let people agonize over this for a while and get to a point of saying, well, the real problem is me not thinking about my actions before I take them. Okay, is that really the problem? No, the real problem is this is a simple shifting the burden archetype, in that I'm dealing with the symptoms again, as opposed to addressing what it is that's causing my frustration. So I did all this stuff as opposed to figuring out how to deal with my frustration. And that's the marvelous thing about developing relationship models, if you spend time actually contemplating them as opposed to just getting lost in the detail, which is enough to drive anybody crazy, even me. So I had another one of these, but I'm running a little late. So over the last umpteen years, I have hundreds of artifacts that are just, they're like stuff in the landfill. So I decided one day that I ought to try and figure out how to put some order in this chaos. And I created the Phoenix Project, which is hundreds of models and videos that I've tried to put in some kind of order. And it's a whole multitude of different maps. Here's everything I think I know about Insight Maker simulation, and everything I know about doing storytelling in Insight Maker, or storytelling in Kumu, or just everything I know about archetypes and whatever. Though every time I think about working on this project, I become almost completely catatonic. So because I can't work on it and I'm not getting anything done, and because I'm not getting anything done, I'm catatonic. And it's another one of those vicious reinforcing cycles. So I decided to take a line from the Monty Python playbook and now for something completely different. So on October 1st, I started creating Systems Wikis Musings, which is probably another set of archetypes for the landfill. And all I can say is it feels good. I'm creating short stories about relationships and their implications, and I'm publishing them, and I'm waiting for the people who are reading them to tell me that I should continue or should I stop, and we'll see. So that's where I am. Questions? I'm done. How are we doing on time? Oh, little 20.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Gene. Thank you very much. Yeah, we've got some questions from various people who've been listening. So we might go through some of those questions if that's all right. I think some of them have been answered along the way already, so that's great. But this goes back to some of what you were saying earlier on in your talk about, sort of what to do on Monday morning. And both Andy and Jorge have got questions about why companies don't really engage effectively with systems, I think, systems thinking. So, why are they not able to use systems thinking as a methodology for improvement? Or Jorge asks, and Andy wonders what can we do with it on Monday morning? So some questions about practical usefulness. I mean, you've obviously been through a very long journey with this and come out with these ideas about being a storyteller about relationships. So I wonder what is your thoughts for that, about making it useful for managers?
So the approach that I talked about in terms of help me understand. Once upon a time, I wrote this article called Change Management, the Columbo Approach. And maybe some of you remember Columbo, the detective series, where he constantly wandered around and asked questions about things that he didn't understand, as opposed to trying to convince people of things. If I try to convince you of something, I push you away. Though when I ask you questions, I bring you toward me. So rather than try and convince you that you should learn systems thinking or whatever, I ask you to help me understand what you're wrestling with. And that's part of what I talked about down here from Buckminster Fuller, and that you will do it when it makes sense to you. Though I can't convince you that it makes sense to you. The best that I could possibly do is to provoke thought. And you have to arrive at the conclusion that this is something sensible. Of course, there's lots of things that we think are sensible that we still don't do because change is tough. I mean, the thing I said about, it's been drilled into us forever that it's not good to make errors. Why do you think we constantly use the phrase trial and error? Which every time somebody says that, I say, wouldn't it be better if we thought about trial and learning? Right? I mean, I don't know how to create models, so I don't create models. So I don't learn how to create models. It's a vicious cycle, and Nike's got the right answer. Just do it. I mean, take out a pencil and piece of paper or a crayon and a napkin, or I don't care what you create it. Just sketch. See, I don't think I can hold more than one thought in my head at a time. Though if I sit down and develop a relationship map, I can contemplate the whole set of relationships at once because I can look at it. And it's that looking at that set of relationships and continuing to say, what does it say? And then attempting to explain it to someone else to figure out whether or not I really understand what I think I understand. And then when I explain it to someone else and they offer me their thoughts, the absolute worst thing I can possibly do is to argue with them. Whatever it is that they offer me is valid from their perspective, so that I should seek to understand why they think that way, as opposed to why it is I don't agree with them. Right? Did I come any close to what the question was?
Well, I can't. Just riffing off you, I couldn't say whether you've answered the question. We'll have to check in with them. I got another question from John, and he wants a clarification about your stories and how you compose them. He asks them, "Do you often compose your stories of implications based on simulations?"
Some people only develop simulation models, and there are some people who believe that people who create causal loop diagrams are sinful. Okay, so I look at it from the perspective of most people, when they build houses, start from a blueprint. For me, a causal loop diagram is a blueprint, and oftentimes I can learn enough from the blueprint to go do something, because simulations, from my perspective, take a lot longer. They take a much greater investment in time and energy to figure out what the formulas are. And so I usually start out with causal loop diagrams. And if I get to a point of asking questions like when and how long and how much, well, the qualitative model is not going to help me at all. I need a simulation. Though, as I said, if we can't come to an understanding of what the problem is, what good is a simulation? I mean, I can't build a simulation because we can't define what ought to be in it. Though all of the models and methods, I distilled down to simply saying they're all about relationships and implications. So when I talk about and, I start with what's the situation or topic that I'm trying to understand. And then I ask one question, and the question is and. It comes in two forms. And what does this influence, and what influences this? And I just ask those same two questions over and over and over and over again. And when I get to a point where I don't have any more answers, then I go find somebody else and say, here's my current level of understanding, which part of this makes sense and which part of it was I out to lunch when I put it together. Of course, to tell the bird feeder model, that came up when Scott and I were writing Connecting the Dots, whatever the rest of the title was. And it was an accidental creation. It was not intentional. We were writing all this stuff and people kept saying, you keep talking about modeling, why don't you build a model? So I built it, but it didn't look like it looks today, because seldom do I really know the best way to tell the story as I'm building the model. When I actually became a storyteller, the first story I developed as a causal loop diagram was Aesop's fable, The Boy Who Cried Wolf. And it's just 4 loops, but it's marvelous in the way that it unfolds in terms of the boy's interaction with the townspeople and becoming bored and crying wolf when there is no wolf, and the implications of that on the townspeople. And it falls out very, I have at times told people that Aesop's Fable is one of the best books on systems I've ever read.
Mm. Wonderful. Okay. Okay, we've got a couple more questions coming through. Satish would like to know when the Certified Systems Thinker course is going to restart.
Yesterday, 2 days ago.
Well, there you go. Okay.
So it was on Udemy, and I didn't like the environment, and I don't know, I just whatever. And so I took it off, and I tried to put it in Kumu, and then I didn't, and whatever. And then I published one of the musings last Friday, and somebody said, whatever happened to the Certified Systems Thinker course? So Sunday I put it back together, and here's the link for it in the chat. It's a free program. You can walk through it. The initiated person can probably get through it in a weekend, and you get through all of this part, and it gets down here, and there are a whole set of exercises that it requests that one do. Do the exercises and share them with somebody else. If you really want to do the exercises and you want me to review them and provide you with video feedback on your models, then it's going to cost you some money, but not much.
Okay. I've got a quick question of my own, actually, which I'll throw in there quickly, and then we'll come back to one of the ones from the audience, which is, you talked there about the certified systems thinker model and so on. I just wonder, what role do you think it needs to be played by the community of systems thinkers? So not individual systems thinkers, but what role does the community of systems thinkers play in I'm glad that made you laugh.
Which community would you like to talk about? I mean, there are dozens of them, and they would all rather fight than switch or join together or whatever. I mean, what happens when you take toys away from children? They cry and scream. So, the reason that systems thinking is not more broadly adopted is because of systems thinkers. Okay. Pogo said, "We have met the enemy and he is us." And it's so true. I mean, we just put people off. And I finally got to a point where I try very hard not to do that. Now, if I talk to people who've been drinking the Kool-Aid for a long time, well, we can talk about systems thinking. When I talk to people that haven't been, well, then I just talk to them about what's related to what and what the implications are. It's like some people are so presumptuous as they say only 5% of the people in the world are capable of systems thinking. And I say, I don't agree with that. The only people that I have ever met not capable of systems thinking are either catatonic or dead. It's a question of degree. If you get up in the morning and you realize that you're hungry, you get out of bed, you take a shower, you get dressed, you go to the kitchen, you eat, and you're no longer hungry. You've just satisfied a goal-seeking structure. You're doing systems thinking. You don't know it. Nobody ever taught you that that's what you're doing. And a real astute systems thinker can help you develop an awareness of what you already understand. It's like, how do you teach a fish to swim in the water? Well, you don't. I mean, swimming in the water, they get better at it. So that by enabling people to realize what they already know, they can actually further develop the skill. Almost everybody knows what chess is. Some people know what the pieces are. Some people actually play. And some people play a lot, and some people become grandmasters. It's a matter of degree. And it's also a matter of the extent to which they think about the implications of the implications of the implications. So cause and effect is step one. But then what's the effect of the effect and the effect of the effect? And you look for loop structures because loop structures have more influence over the behavior of the structure than anything else.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that comment has resonated really strongly with a lot of people in this session. Lots of comments saying, yeah, there's a sort of argument in the system circles, and system thinkers being barriers to system thinking, and sort of a technocratic and exclusive approach rather than a sort of inclusive approach. So that's really resonated with people, and it connects with Julia's own question, which is, Julia asked, do you think people expect systems thinking to be more complex than the situation they are looking at, thus putting them off? So perhaps there's a connection there in terms of how it is portrayed by systems people.
Well, if I don't know anything about systems thinking, and as soon as you mention systems thinking, I'm threatened because I don't know. All right. So it's just, Sengi said one of our greatest learning disabilities is we become what we do. So systems thinkers are system thinkers, and it's the same problem with organizations. They become what they do, and they lose sight of what they enable. Right? So rather than being wedded to what you do, what is the benefit? What does it have the potential to enable? And is there another way to achieve that enabling other than by brute force convincing people that they have to learn systems thinking?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Hold on. Just catching up with some of the chat. Somebody is. Okay, I've got a question that was submitted a bit earlier before the talk, actually, which is about the kind of tools that you used a lot in your work, Insight Maker and Kuma and so on. You obviously demonstrate great enabling qualities with those tools. And what do you think are the limitations of those tools when you experience them?
Imagination. I have not yet. I mean, what's the? I lost the thought.
That's
the world model. The model the Club of Rome did. What was it? I don't know. What was it called? Do you remember?
World 3.
Yeah, World 3. It's in Insight Maker. You can call it up and play with it, and there are probably a dozen clones of it in there. I mean, all right. There's a, if you go to Insight Maker, there's a video introduction of version 3 that sort of gives an overview of all of the capabilities. It's about 15 minutes long, and it can do sensitivity analysis and lots of features that are usable. And my comment is, it's free. Use it until it runs out of gas, and then go find something that's going to cost you a fortune. And Kumu is free for all of the public models that you want to create. And if you want to create private ones, then you're probably doing them for someone that should be paying for it anyway. So you have to pay for the use. I don't have any private or Kumu or Insight Maker models. They're all public, and there's, I don't know, 400 or 500 of them.
Mm-hmm. Just one more question, and then maybe I'll hand it over to Martin to give his thanks. And this is a question about your notion of storytelling and you being a storyteller. And I just wonder whether there's something about, in traditional societies, often storytellers are the wise elders who've been through a lot of experience. And I just wonder what you think about, perhaps people who are relatively less experienced in organizations sort of taking on the role of storyteller, and what might be the unintended consequences of sort of taking on that role. Because often we have a lot of our students who sort of really value and appreciate the insights that our teaching brings, but then find themselves with sort of burnt fingers inside the organizations when they're working there, sort of telling these different stories about how things could be. What are your thoughts about perhaps people who are maybe have less power or agency within a situation, who want to act as storytellers?
It's not a question of power or agency. It's just learning to ask questions in a manner that doesn't annoy people. Right? So that, in other words, the thing that I said about Columbo always discounted himself and was trying to get other people to help him understand things that he didn't understand. So that why is absolutely the wrong question to ask in any situation or context, because why is asking you to justify yourself. Right? Frame it in some fashion in terms of, the difficult, not why do you think this, I'm having trouble connecting this with this. Can you help me understand? Okay. Not why do you think this? Because
wonderful. Okay, thank you.
Of course, I'm also willing to operate every day from the perspective that everything I currently believe may be wrong.
Great. That's really wonderful. Thank you. I think I'm going to hand it over to Martin, who's got a few closing comments.
Thanks, Rupesh, and thank you, Jean, for an incredibly insightful look into your own personal journey around systems thinking in practice. There are several things that sort of stand out for me or resonate with me in particular. I mean, first of all, as a standout thing, your use of social media and tools for conveying the stories is really quite impressive, and I speak as a kind of a Neanderthal, I think, with the use of social media. But there's lots of wonderful opportunities and affordances that you provide in using the technology. Rupesh raised a question towards the end there about possible constraints around some of these technologies in conveying the stories. And I think these are kind of constraints about the medium or the media, including platforms like the LinkedIn and Facebook. Aside from the actual tools that enable you to do the system dynamics modeling. But I think what you do actually with the social media tools is fantastic. Actually, it's really good. As far as resonance is concerned, I mean, I guess there's two things that come out for me in your work, Jean. First of all, this wonderful sense of playfulness that you bring and that you convey. I mean, it's kind of centered around the notion of trial and learning. And it's lovely. It's lovely to experience somebody actually doing that stuff, basically having fun, mucking about with boundaries, with boundary judgments. And systems are, at the end of the day, simply bounded constructs that we contrive, we make, we can adapt, and we play about with. And whether you're doing it through a bit of software or whether you're doing it on the back of the envelope, which is often the means that I use, it can actually be not only very insightful but just very enjoyable as well. And I suppose this sort of comes back to the notion of systems thinking practitioners perhaps taking ourselves sometimes a bit too seriously. I think again, that sort of resonates with some of my experiences of the systems thinking factions of communities that you refer to. The other theme I think that resonates with me with your work is this notion of learn by doing. The learning by doing, this notion of praxis, basically the thinking in practice, which I think underpins systems thinking in practice and good practical advice, as it were. It's all based around sort of social learning ideas. And I think it is such an important aspect of systems thinking that sometimes we can be alienated and targeted as systems thinkers, as being something aloof to the practical world. Whereas in fact, as systems thinking practitioners, of course, we are always engaging in practice. And the more that we engage in that practice, the better our understanding, the insights and so forth that sort of emerge from that. I mean, in order to do that, though, I think there is something about having a safe space for trialing these ideas. And indeed, I would actually put a little bit of a claim about going through the process of error, of failing. And through the errors and the disappointments, perhaps at times, that generate the learning process. But very often we're working in environments, whether it's a community of systems thinking practitioners or whether it's our own organizational learning space, where we're not allowed to have that kind of safe fail environment. And I just wonder whether, I mean, again, listening to you and the enjoyment that you have, and the clear sort of playfulness around systems thinking, whether we can somehow contrive a better sense of space in which, in our working spaces as well as in our other spaces that we occupy, a better space for that safe fail environment. So there are things about, there's wonderful sense of humility. There's that sort of sense of inevitable fallibility as well, about systems thinking, which comes out from your work, and as well as this very central thing about purposefulness. And again, it's the purposefulness that kind of should be driving the questions around which systems thinking practitioners are exploring these ideas. And I think on that note, I'd just like to finish. I'd like to also announce the next speaker. Julian Corner will be with us on the 9th of November. Julian Corner, his topic is around social justice. So he thinks very much about the purposefulness of his systems thinking in practice experiences, and Julian is a CEO of quite a significant philanthropic agency in the UK, Lankelly Chase. He's one of our early alumni, and so we look forward to having Julian with us on social justice. And there will be a link to that posted actually on this site. So with that, I'd like to just thank our technical support staff, Katrina Bray in particular, and Sam, who've been providing that technical support for this. I'd like to thank my colleague Rupert Shah for facilitating this. And moreover, Jean, I really do appreciate this wonderful presentation, and thank you so much for being with us. And thank you everybody for joining us and for providing these really good questions and discussions. Hopefully look forward to you joining us again on the 9th of November. But thank you.
All right, Martin, final note, I just dropped a link to this Kumu project, which is the source of this presentation. And as soon as I get the video link from your YouTube channel, I will put that link in here, so it will also be in the project.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks very much, Jean. And just to remind everybody, there are recordings, and this will be up on the YouTube site that we have for the Systems Thinking in Practice 50th anniversary. But yes, again, thanks very much, Jean. Cheers.
Bye.